Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the Dardeen family murders. But before I get into the case, I just want to thank Hunt a Killer for sponsoring this video. If you're interested in like true crime and mysteries, which I mean I'm guessing you are if you watch my videos, then you definitely need to check out Hunt a Killer. It's one of the fastest growing subscription boxes with tens of thousands of subscribers and an online community connecting them all. When you sign up to the service, you receive one of these boxes every single month, and each box is an episode in the mystery game. In my last video where I talked about Hunt a Killer, we went through episode 1, and as you can see here, I'm going through episode 2. Each box gives you clues and evidence to look through, such as audio recordings, official documents, and case files which you have to piece together to solve the mystery. And one thing that I absolutely love about the service is that for every single box that is sold, a portion of the money goes to the Cold Case Foundation, which is an organisation that helps real life cold cases get solved. I really like Hunt a Killer. I really enjoy sitting down and going through the boxes and looking at all the clues and evidence. It's like delving into the world of detective work, and they are offering you guys, my subscribers, the incredible discount of 20% off your first box when you use the discount code Mollie. Once again, that's the code Mollie for 20% off. The link to the website will be top line of the description box. Thank you so much to Hunt a Killer for sponsoring this video, and now let's get into this case. Before I do, I just want to clarify that my intent with these videos is never to offend or upset anyone that may have been involved with this case. Everything that I've collected for this video has been from several different sources online, all of which are linked in the description box. And having said all of that, let's just get into today's case. So this case took place in November of 1987 in Ina, which is a village in Jefferson County in Illinois in the US. The Dardeen family consisted of married couple Russell Keith Dardeen, who was 29 years old, and his wife, 30-year-old Ruby Elaine Dardeen. Just as a side note, they both actually preferred going by their middle names, so Keith and Elaine. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be calling them Keith and Elaine Dardeen. Keith and Elaine also had a 3-year-old son called Peter, and at the time of this case taking place in November of 1987, Elaine was actually pregnant. It was going to be a baby girl, and they planned on naming her Casey. Keith Dardeen worked as a treatment plant operator, and his wife Elaine worked in an office supply store, and in their spare time they both really enjoyed being a part of the musical ensemble in their local Baptist church. Keith sang the lead vocals in the church, I believe, and Elaine played the piano. And the Dardeen family lived in a mobile home, which was next to some woodland beside Route 37, which was just outside Ina in Illinois. Now, Keith Dardeen was very protective of his family, and he actually wanted to move to Mount Carmel, where he used to live. He expressed to his mother, Joanne, that he did not feel safe living in Ina because at the time there had been a real increase in crimes such as rape and murder in the surrounding area. In fact, in just the previous 2 years, there had been 15 homicides in Jefferson County, and Keith just didn't want his family living amongst this violence, especially because at the time Elaine was obviously pregnant with their second child, and they just wanted their children to grow up in a safe neighborhood as any parent would. But like I said, Keith was so protective of his family to the point where he would not let any strangers into their home. On one occasion, a woman actually knocked on the Dardeens' door and asked if she could come inside and use their phone, and Keith actually said no, just because he was so wary of strangers. And so at the time of this case, the Dardeen family were planning on moving hopefully soon, and I believe they put their mobile home up for sale. But then on the 18th of November 1987, Keith Dardeen didn't show up for work, and he didn't call in sick or anything either. And this was so unlike Keith. He was a very reliable worker. In fact, I don't believe he had ever just not turned up to work before. And so his supervisor tried to ring the Dardeens' house phone, but there was no answer. And so this supervisor then decided to ring Keith's parents. but they said that they had no idea where he was and they hadn't heard from him either. At this point, concerns were growing for the Dardeen family, and so the police were contacted, and later that same evening, Keith's father met police officers outside the Dardeens' mobile home because he had a spare key, meaning that he could get into it. And when they went inside, they found the dead bodies of Elaine Dardeen and her 3-year-old son, Peter. I will just give you a little warning here. The rest of the video is quite graphic, so if you don't want to listen to that, then I suggest clicking off now. But both Elaine and her son, Peter, had been beaten to death with a baseball bat, which actually belonged to 3-year-old Peter. His father, Keith, actually got him that baseball bat for his birthday earlier that year. Elaine was hit with the bat on the top of her head, which actually fractured her skull, and Peter was also hit in the head with the baseball bat, which again also fractured his skull. Now, if you remember, Elaine was actually pregnant at the time with her second child, and I don't know exactly how far along she was, but I'm guessing she was probably in the final stages of pregnancy, because while she was being beaten to death, she actually went into labour. That's how severely she was beaten, and she actually gave birth to this child who, like I said earlier, was a baby girl. And this next part makes me feel physically sick, but once Elaine had given birth to this baby, the killer or killers beat this newborn baby to death as well. I don't know if Elaine was already dead at this point when the killers did this. I hope that she was, because I cannot even imagine how traumatic that must have been to witness that. Elaine had been bound with duct tape and she was also gagged. I also believe that Peter had been bound, and once all 3 of them were dead, the attacker or attackers just picked them up, put them back into bed, and just tucked them into bed together. As you can imagine, the scene was just absolutely covered in blood, and the killer had actually made an attempt to clean the crime scene, but I think ultimately he just gave up and left. Now, initially, the police actually believed that Elaine's husband Keith could have been the killer because he was nowhere to be found. He wasn't in the home and his car was also gone, and so it appeared as though he may have fled or gone on the run after murdering his family. He was the main suspect in the murders at the beginning of this case, and so there was a hunt for Keith Dardeen, and a team of armed officers were sent to his mother's house to see if he was there, but he wasn't. But the search for Keith Dardeen didn't last long. The day after the discovery of the bodies of Elaine, Peter and the newborn baby, Keith Dardeen's body was discovered by a group of hunters in a wheat field just over the Franklin County line, about a mile away from his mobile home. Now, Keith hadn't been beaten to death like the other members of his family. He had actually been shot 3 times. Once in the frontal skull, once on the right side of his face, and once through his left cheek. The killer had also mutilated his genitals, although I couldn't find whether this was done before or after death. Keith's car was found parked outside a police station around 11 miles away in Benton, and the interior of this car was just absolutely covered in blood, indicating that this was the place where Keith was killed, and then his body was dumped in the wheat field. All of the bodies were taken for autopsies, and these couldn't conclude like what order the family had been killed in, but it did determine that they all died within an hour or 2. The coroner estimated that Elaine, Peter and the newborn baby had been dead for around 12 hours before they were found, and Keith had been dead for between 24 to 36 hours before he was found. But remember, he was found the day after the other bodies. And the police questioned whether just one person was responsible for these murders. Would just one person be able to overpower the whole of the Dardeen family? And because Keith had been taken away from the home and killed elsewhere, it was theorized that maybe there were 2 killers involved in this crime, or possibly even multiple. Let's say if there were 2 people involved, one of them stayed at the mobile home and killed Elaine, Peter and the newborn baby, and the other one took Keith away and killed him. But if this was just one attacker, then he obviously had a gun, and so he could have threatened the family with it and tied up Elaine and Peter, and then took Keith away and killed him first, and then returned to the rest of the family and killed them after after Keith. But like I mentioned earlier, the coroner couldn't determine who was killed first. News of the Dardeen family murders spread so quickly throughout the area, and as you can imagine, everyone was just so terrified, even more than they were before. There had already been 15 homicides in Jefferson County in the previous 2 years, and this attack on the Dardeen family was just so brutal. It seemed as if nobody was safe. Now, you're probably thinking that these 15 homicides could have all been linked. Maybe the person who killed the Dardeen family was the same person who carried out some of those attacks. And honestly, I am thinking the same. It sounds to me like there could have been a serial killer in the local area or something. However, I couldn't actually find any information online about these 15 homicides. I don't know whether the police looked into the possibility that maybe they were all linked and committed by the same person. I'm guessing that they did, and that it was just eventually ruled out, because it does sound like a really strong possibility. But yeah, people were just so scared. There was a huge rise in gun sales because everyone was literally buying a gun to protect themselves and protect their families. There was also a rise in sales for like security systems for people's homes. Everyone was keeping their doors locked. They never let strangers into their homes. It was just horrible for everyone that was living there. I cannot imagine the fear that everyone must have felt, especially because it didn't seem as though the police were any closer to finding the killer. Pretty much straight away in the investigation, the theory that this could have been a robbery gone wrong was ruled out, because just lying around in the Dardeens' mobile home was like cash, there was expensive jewelry, a camera, and none of these items had been taken. And you would think if this was a robbery, they would have taken those things. There was also no sign of forced entry, and the back door was unlocked, which I think suggests that the killer must have been someone that the Dardeen family knew personally, because like I said earlier, Keith was so protective of his family. He would never let strangers into his home. So it seems like Keith must have known this person to let them into his home. Also, the fact that these murders were so violent and brutal and aggressive, to me, indicates that this was a personal attack. Someone had some sort of grudge and anger towards the Dardeen family and wanted to take it out on them. But at the same time, when the police spoke to everyone, pretty much everyone that knew the Dardeen family, it didn't appear as though they had any known enemies or knew anyone that would want to murder them. Now, there was a little bit of marijuana found at the scene, and so it was theorized that maybe someone was trying to get Keith to sell drugs for them or something like that, but he refused, and so they killed him. However, when I say there was a little bit of marijuana found at the scene, I literally mean the smallest amount. There wasn't enough for Keith to sell, and so it's believed that this marijuana probably just belonged to the killers and they just accidentally left it behind. The autopsies also concluded that there were no drugs or alcohol in the victims' bodies, so they don't think the marijuana belonged to Elaine or Keith. Another theory that I read was that maybe either Keith or Elaine could have been having an affair at the time of the murders, and the killer could have been the person that they were like seeing on the side. Maybe the motive for the murder was a jealousy thing. But this theory was also quickly ruled out because Elaine and Keith seemed really happy together, and the police found no evidence that either of them were cheating. Keith's mother Joanne said that there was the possibility that maybe someone liked Elaine and fancied her, but she turned them down, obviously because she was with Keith, and so he took his anger out on her and the rest of the family. There was also speculation that Keith could have been in some gambling debts, because found in the home was a stack of papers all with like sports scores on it, and so the police wondered if maybe Keith was into like sports gambling and he got himself into some debt which he couldn't pay off, and so he was killed. But his mother Joanne didn't believe this theory at all. She said that her son was always very good with money, and pretty much all of his spare money would go towards his son Peter's college fund for when he was older. There was also a rumour going around that the murders could have been a satanic ritual carried out by a group of Satanists, but this was never really like a police theory. Like I said, this was just a rumor and it was ruled out by the police. But anyway, despite all of these rumors and theories, the police didn't really have any evidence to support any of them, and so they were really stuck in this case. All of the tips and leads that they did have, they had looked into, and nothing ever came of any of them. And despite over 30 detectives investigating this case and them interviewing over 100 people, the case just went cold. The police had literally nothing to go on, and eventually they had to start putting their time into investigating other cases. But Keith's mother, Joanne, was not giving up. She was determined to get some justice for her son and his family, and so she would ring the sheriff's office literally every week, just pushing them to keep working on her son's case. I've got a quote here from Joanne that says, "I carried Keith for 9 months. I raised him. I worshipped the ground he walked on. He was a good man and a good father, and I will never give up." Joanne was desperate not to lose the public's interest in the case either, and she would contact like TV shows such as the Oprah Winfrey Show and ask them to run a segment about the murders in the hopes that this might bring forward some new leads. The Oprah Winfrey Show said that they couldn't run the segment because the murders were too brutal to talk about on daytime television. However, the TV program America's Most Wanted agreed to talk about the Dardeen family murders, but sadly this didn't result in any new tips or leads. Now, there were 2 suspects in the Dardeen family murders, which I'm going to talk about now, and I'd be really interested to hear whether or not you guys think that either of these 2 men could have been the killer. So please do let me know your thoughts in the comments. The first was a man named Angel Maturino Resendiz, or as he called himself, Rafael Ramirez. I think that he gave himself this fake name, Rafael Ramirez, in an attempt not to be caught. Rafael Ramirez was a serial killer suspected of killing up to 23 people, and he was nicknamed the Railroad Killer. And this was because he would travel around the country on trains and he would constantly like hop off to find his victims. He would choose victims that lived near the train tracks, I believe, and then beat them to death. And he actually surrendered to the authorities in Texas in 1999, and he came to the attention of the detectives investigating the Dardeen case because there were a few similarities between Raphael's murders and the murders of the Dardeen family. Firstly, he would usually beat his victims to death, and if you remember, Elaine, Peter and the newborn baby were beaten to death with a baseball bat. And also, I believe that the land that the Dardeen family lived on was close to the Illinois Central Railroad tracks, and obviously that's how Raphael chose his victims. He would choose people who lived near the train tracks, hence why he became known as the Railroad Killer. However, despite these possible links, he was pretty much ruled out as being the killer because there was no like evidence or anything linking him to the crime. I'd be interested to know though if Raphael had an alibi for the time of the murders because I couldn't actually find that anywhere online. The second suspect in the case, who was actually the main suspect for a while, was a man named Tommy Lynn Sells. Tommy was an American serial killer and he was arrested after slashing the throats of 2 young girls in 1999. One of these girls was 13 years old and one of them was 10, although only one of them survived the attack. Now, no one is entirely sure how many people Tommy has killed. I believe the authorities have linked him to around 22 murders. But Tommy himself, after he was arrested, said that he had killed up to 70 people, including the Dardeen family. So he actually confessed to the Dardeen family murders. So investigators at this point were probably thinking, great, after all these years, we finally found the killer. However, there were a lot of issues with Tommy's version of events. He confessed to the murders, but his story kept changing. On one occasion, Tommy claimed that he met Keith Dardeen at either a truck shop or a pool hall, and they got chatting, and eventually Keith invited Tommy round to his home for some dinner. Tommy agreed to go back with Keith, and he said that whilst he was there, Keith asked him if he wanted to engage in a threesome with him and his wife Elaine. And he said that this triggered something inside of him. It triggered this anger, and so he held Keith at gunpoint, took him away and mutilated his genitals and killed him, and then he returned to the rest of the family and killed them as well. I've actually got a quote from Tommy here that says, "I was just so pissed off that I took it to the maximum limit. Rage don't have a stop button." But then he would just completely change his story. One minute he would say that he met Keith at a truck shop or a pool hall, and then the next it was something completely different. On another occasion, he said that he remembered getting off a train near Ina and seeing a for sale sign outside the Dardeens' mobile home, because if you remember, they were trying to sell it at the time because they wanted to move. Tommy said that he saw the for sale sign outside the Dardeens' home, and so he knocked on their door and pretended that he was interested in buying it, and at some point he managed to overpower Keith and he made him tie up his own wife and son, and then he forced Keith to drive his car to the wheat field where his body was found. And then once he had murdered Keith, he went back to the home and killed the rest of the family before driving Keith's car to the police station in Benton. His story would just constantly change, and so the police began asking him if he knew like specific details about the murders, stuff that wasn't released to the public and so only the killer would know. But Tommy said that he couldn't really remember anything about the actual killings, and he said that this wasn't just the case with the Dardeen family. With all of his murders, he wouldn't remember physically killing these people, and he claimed that this was because when he was a young child he was sexually abused a lot, and so he managed to like train his brain to block out and forget these occasions as a coping strategy. And he said that he used this same strategy to carry out his murders, so his brain would kind of automatically block out the murders after he had done them so that he would forget specific details. Whether that is true or not, I don't know. It's also important to note that Tommy suffered with several mental illnesses, including personality disorder, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, and psychosis. Now, when Tommy first confessed to the murders in the year 2000, Keith's mother, Joanne, was convinced that he was the right guy. She was convinced that he was the killer. But as time went on, she started to doubt this because of his account of the murders. She said that there was absolutely no way Keith would invite a stranger that he had just met back to his home because, like I've said throughout this video, Keith Dardeen was very protective of his family. And as well as that, the police have never actually been able to link Tommy to the crime. In fact, a lot of what he did say about the murders doesn't match up to the evidence at all. For example, it's believed that Keith was killed inside his car because of blood spatter that they found inside of it, I think. And so they asked Tommy which seat in the car Keith was sitting in when he was shot, and he actually said the wrong one. Tommy was also asked how Elaine's body had been like positioned in the bed by the killer, and at first his answer was wrong, but then he answered again and his second answer was correct. So maybe he initially just forgot the answer and then he suddenly remembered it, or he just kept like reeling off different answers until one was correct, if that makes sense. But anyway, the police never had any physical evidence linking him to the murder of the Dardeen family, and so he was never charged with it. Like I mentioned earlier on in the video, Tommy confessed to at least 70 murders, but authorities could only link him to around 22. And Tommy actually received the death penalty and he was put to death in 2014 in Texas. And to this day, almost 33 years later, no one has ever been charged with the murders of the Dardeen family. Unfortunately, I don't think that this case will ever be solved. I also don't think that Tommy was responsible for the murders. I think that he just wanted to claim that he was responsible for as many killings as he could. But what do you guys think? Do you think that Tommy was the killer, or do you think that Raphael was, or do you think there was just someone else that police haven't found yet? Do you think that there was more than one killer? Do you think that whoever killed the Dardeen family must have known them, or was it just like a random attack? As usual, please do leave me your thoughts and opinions on the case in the comments. But yeah, that is the end of this case. Hopefully one day the family of the Dardeens will get some answers and there will finally be justice for this poor family. Before I go, I just want to give a special shout out to the members of my Patreon page. Thank you so much for your support, guys. If anyone else wants to become a member of our little Patreon family, the link is always in the description of my videos. Thank you as well to Hunt a Killer for sponsoring this video. Remember to use the discount code Mollie for 20% off your first box. The link to the Hunt a Killer website will be top line of the description box. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you again very soon for another mystery with Mollie. Bye guys.